This program is about unsolved mysteries. Whenever possible, the actual family members and police officials have participated in recreating the events. What you are about to see is not a news broadcast.
1966, Quang Tri Province, South Vietnam. A helicopter crash claims the life of Navy medic Mark Dennis. 4 years later, this photograph of an unknown American POW appeared in Newsweek magazine. The Dennis family became convinced that Mark had survived the crash and was captured by the Viet Cong. Dorothy Izat, an unassuming Canadian homemaker, has captured these eerie lights on film and believes there is no explanation other than UFOs. The skeptics are unconvinced. Ricardo Caputo, a charismatic ladies' man and allegedly a brutal killer. According to the police, Caputo has murdered at least 5 women, and authorities need your help to catch him. Also tonight, an update on our recent profile on one of the FBI's 10 most wanted criminals. Thanks to our broadcast, a suspected serial child molester is now in custody. Join us. You may be able to help solve a mystery. March 1966, Miamisburg, Ohio.
Well, if I remember right, this is the hardest part.
The war in Vietnam was escalating. Navy medic Mark Dennis said goodbye to his family.
Take care, bud. Will do.
Okay. I miss you. Promise to write, okay?
Mark had joined the Navy in 1964 at the age of 17. He chose to be a medic because he believed it would be useful in his desire to one day become a missionary.
So be careful. Do what they tell you to do. You're gonna be all right.
Yes, sir.
Mark Dennis was a deeply religious young man with a strong sense of compassion. According to his family, he had volunteered for service in Vietnam so that a married soldier with a family would not have to go. Once in Vietnam, Mark was attached to the Marine 2nd Battalion, Company E, stationed in Dong Ha, next to the demilitarized zone. In combat slang, the sector was hot.
Go! We all knew he was going into combat, but it was really not on anybody's mind that it was as bad as it became a few months later. So we all felt, it was dangerous, but it was his place to go. He had volunteered.
July 15th, 1966. Mark and 15 other men were aboard a Chinook helicopter, bringing assistance to a battalion hemmed in by the North Vietnamese Army. The helicopter ran into heavy enemy gunfire. This is an actual photograph of Mark's helicopter shortly after it was hit. The helicopter crashed and exploded in the midst of an infantry firefight. According to Navy records, only 3 men survived: a pilot, a co-pilot, and the gunner. 13 men had perished in the crash.
When I came down the street, I saw the Navy vehicle. First thing that hit my mind is, did Mark get killed? I pulled up to the house, and I heard my sister yell, "Marky's dead." It was just a total shock. Then the wait for the casket, it just was days and then turned into weeks. The whole thing was really a trauma that is difficult today to even talk about.
Mark Dennis was buried on August 9th, 1966. Due to the condition of the body, the Navy suggested that the family not view the remains. they complied.
The first 4 years was rough, and the Vietnam War went on, and we just tried to shut it out of our lives until 1970.
On November 30th, 1970, Newsweek magazine published this photograph of an unknown prisoner of war. When the Dennis family saw the photograph, they thought it looked just like Mark. Suddenly faced with a possibility that Mark might be alive, they immediately contacted the Navy. Naval authorities requested additional photographs of Mark to see if they could make a positive identification. 6 weeks passed. Finally, the Navy concluded the man in the photograph was not Mark Dennis, but rather a previously documented prisoner. The Navy continued to maintain Mark had been killed in action. Unconvinced, Jerry Dennis requested that the Navy forward Mark's death certificate. The death certificate brought a disturbing revelation. It appeared that every man killed in the crash had been positively identified except Mark Dennis. The Navy stated that they were definitely able to match 12 bodies found in the wreckage with 12 men from Mark's unit. The 13th body was burned beyond recognition. They apparently assumed it was Mark by a process of elimination. Jerry Dennis, still believing the man pictured in Newsweek might be his brother, now became convinced that Mark had survived. Several weeks after the photograph appeared, Jerry received further evidence that his brother might not have died in the crash. In 1971, an article about Jerry Dennis's efforts to find out what happened to his brother appeared in the local newspaper. The next day, Jerry was visited by a Navy dental technician named Steve Wilcox. Steve Wilcox had been Mark's best friend in boot camp. 6 months after Mark was reported killed, Steve met another medic who had served with Mark in Vietnam.
Everybody that came to the hospital had to come through my office. They had to deliver their dental records to me, so I knew where everybody came from. And I knew that there was just one medic who had come from Nam. I saw him later, and we had a chance to talk.
We worked together a lot in the field as medics. He's one of the best medics in the group, too.
I mentioned that I had a friend that was killed in Nam, and mentioned that it was Mark Dennis. And he was in Mark's unit.
Hey, were you there when that chopper went down?
No, I wasn't actually there. Look.
Then he started to share some information with me that was caught me off guard. It really surprised me.
I don't think Mark died that day.
But they sent the body home. I mean, the family buried Mark.
Well, I was in the first recovery crew, right?
First of all, he said that Mark was not supposed to have been on that helicopter. And secondly, nobody really in the unit believed that Mark was dead. There was no evidence at the crash site that he was on the helicopter when it crashed.
In the chaotic aftermath of the crash, the medic recalled that no equipment bags belonging to Navy medics were found in the debris, nor were Mark Dennis's dog tags. Most alarming, he reported that there were not 13 bodies recovered as claimed by the Navy.
I was very frustrated that I could not remember his name. There are a lot of things that were unsettling with him. I was more concerned with Mark, naturally, so that's what I remember the most, but I do remember that he was, he indicated things were happening there that he didn't understand and bothered him.
Based on Steve Wilcox's story, the Dennis family chose to ignore the Navy's recommendation not to view the body. They decided to have the remains exhumed.
I guess I'm about as ready as I'll ever be. Let's go ahead and do it.
Because the body had been burned beyond recognition, military procedure called for the uniform to be placed on top. The remains were underneath, wrapped in a plastic bag covered by a Navy blanket.
Dog tag.
Jerry found dog tags pinned to the blanket. The tags seemed brand new and still had sharp edges.
I immediately grabbed the dog tag to read it, and a burr in the dog tag sunk into my thumb, actually drew blood. And I immediately realized these dog tags were never worn, or they would have cut your chest to ribbons.
Jerry also noticed curious burn marks on the tags.
They were not from a helicopter crash. I was into the arson field. I knew what the temperatures reached in that helicopter as it burned and melted down. These dog tags were not in that helicopter.
Jerry Dennis once again contacted the Navy. Their initial response was that the tags must have been thrown from the helicopter and burned at a lower temperature. Later, they arrived at a different conclusion.
The ID tags that are recovered from a crash site would have been brought to the mortuary with the remains. But since it was not mentioned on the death certificate that ID tags were part of the identification process, I have to assume that new ID tags were made at the Army mortuary in Saigon. That was standard policy at that time.
That is normal. It is not normal to make up a dog tag and burn it to make it simulate that it was in a crash.
Jerry had lab technicians examine residue from the tags. They concluded the tags had been charred in a low-grade fire under a controlled flame. A forensic anthropologist determined that the height of the dead man was approximately 5'7", which corresponded with the Navy's estimate. However, in 1963, Mark Dennis was measured at 5'9½". Further, his family claims that when he left for Vietnam 3 years later, he had grown to 6 feet tall. Jerry also ordered tests on scrapings taken from the remains. The tests revealed traces of lead, another inconsistency.
The body was not blown up in a Chinook helicopter because the Chinook helicopter uses JP4, JP5 non-leaded kerosene. This body had been burned with regular gasoline.
What he failed to consider as possible other contaminants of lead in that incident were military radio batteries on board the aircraft, ammunition, paint from the aircraft, that kind of thing. The standard reference used by the FBI states that there are also minute presence of lead that occurs naturally in human bone.
We weren't talking about bone marrow. We're talking about the residues, the smoke on the surface of the burned areas, the bone, the flesh, the skull itself. So they were comparing eggs and oranges.
In November 1971, Jerry officially requested a change in Mark's status from killed in action to missing in action. The Navy refused.
I was given a choice, either accepting that body, or if we refused to accept it, the Navy was going to bury it in Arlington Cemetery with Mark's headstone on it. And I decided there's no way in hell they're going to do that.
2 months later, the Dennis family reburied the body in Miamisburg. Jerry placed a ribbon upon the headstone. It read, "In memory of one known only to God." March 1973, the war in Vietnam was over. The first prisoners of war began coming home. The Dennis family prayed that Mark would be among them. He was not. The arrival of the Vietnamese boat people in the late 1970s brought renewed hope. Stories of American GIs still being held captive in Vietnam. For most of us, the Vietnam War had begun to fade by 1980. For Jerry Dennis and the families of other men whose fate was still unknown, the war raged on. Jerry decided to renew his efforts and petitioned his congressman to investigate the circumstances surrounding Mark's death. In 1981, pressure from Jerry's congressman forced the Navy into interviewing Captain Gary Lucas, the helicopter gunner who survived the crash. In a signed affidavit, Lucas stated that 2 men had jumped from the helicopter, though he assumed they were killed.
The man who got out of this alive said men jumped out of the aircraft in enemy territory prior to the crash. At least 2 he saw jump.
Did he see it? The pilot said that the smoke was so bad after the aircraft was hit, he could not see to fly the helicopter. Or did he see 2 people move towards the rear of the aircraft to try and get away from the fire? The fact remains that all the remains of those that perished on that aircraft were recovered.
When I first became involved in this, it was a personal issue. It was a brother, Mark Dennis, the kid that got left behind by the U.S. government. And it was a very personal thing. Everybody involved in this issue, the family members, start out that way. But you don't remain that way very long.
Over the next 4 years, Jerry Dennis became increasingly active in national POW and MIA organizations. He made numerous trips to Washington to plead his case. Then in December of 1986, Jerry got another piece of compelling evidence that Mark had not died in the crash.
Where did you get these bracelets?
This is a bracelet of Jerry's brother, who's a POW.
The gentleman to my left really became absorbed in listening, and I knew he was interested.
Probability may be alive today.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I didn't want to interrupt, but I happened to overhear part of your conversation.
Yes, sir.
My name is John King.
John, Jerry, this is Carol.
Hi. I heard you talking about the POWs. When I was in the Air Force, I happened to be a POW myself from 66 to 69. I was moved around a lot, 4 different camps, and the last camp I was in, there was a gentleman by the name of Dennis.
And I said, well, what was his first name? He said, I don't know. We all went by nicknames. I said, what was his nickname? When he told me his nickname was Preacher, I got cold chills. Mark was very close to the church. He talked about becoming a missionary before he went in the service. While in the service, he had just written home in letters that his unit was separated, and he was the acting chaplain for the group he was in. He was proud of that. Here's a man telling us all these years later, excuse me, that was his nickname. Then we pulled out Mark's picture.
Yeah, that's him.
You're sure?
I'm positive that's him.
It's what I'd been saying all along, could be, probably was, that he lived. He definitely lived through the crash in 66. The odds he was still alive, especially if he was once captured as a medic, he was useful to these people as a medic.
I basically feel I have become pretty good friends with Mr. Jerry Dennis over the years since I've been working with him. And I've made every effort on behalf of the Navy to try and convince him that we have a positive identification of his brother Mark's remains. I get the impression from Mr. Dennis that he still does not believe they are his brother's remains, or for some reason doesn't want to believe it. But I, in my own heart, feel that for sure we have the remains of Mark Dennis.
No matter what we come up with, I swear if I marched Mark Dennis into the United States Navy headquarters tomorrow, they'd find some excuse to discredit his identification. It doesn't matter what you present. They aren't going to change.
Did Mark Dennis die in the helicopter crash, or did he survive only to be taken prisoner by the North Vietnamese? Jerry Dennis may never know who is buried in his brother's grave, but if it isn't Mark Dennis, then another family has never been able to put their son to rest.
Whether Mark is alive today, I don't know. What condition he would be in, where he would be at, I don't know. But in my opinion, no one else knows either, except some Vietnamese who hold the keys. But the point is, Mark Dennis has a right, a constitutional right, to not be listed dead by the stroke of a pen. He has a right to be accounted for, he has a right to be demanded. And that's never been done by our government for Mark Dennis.
After the story originally aired, additional details emerged which may shed new light on the mystery of Mark Dennis. We were contacted by the Department of the Army, which sought to clarify some of the more controversial issues presented in our broadcast. As we reported, Jerry Dennis first became convinced that his brother might still be alive when Newsweek magazine published this photograph of an unidentified prisoner of war. Jerry felt that it bore a strong resemblance to Mark. 6 months later, the Dennis family was told by the Navy that the man had been positively identified as Paul Galante, a U.S. Navy commander shot down over North Vietnam in 1966 and released from captivity in 1973. Nevertheless, Jerry Dennis continued to press his case against the military.
When I was in the Air Force, I happened to be a POW myself from 66 to 69.
16 years later, in 1986, Jerry met a man named John King. King presented himself as a former POW who had managed to escape. He claimed to have met Mark Dennis while both were in captivity.
Yeah, that's him.
It is now known that the name John King is not officially listed as a POW in any branch of the military. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the case concerns the remains exhumed from Mark Dennis's grave. Jerry Dennis did not believe X-rays taken of those bones matched X-rays taken of his brother at the time of his enlistment. With the cooperation of the U.S. Department of the Army, we contacted Dr. John Fitzpatrick, an independent forensic radiologist. To positively identify the body, Dr. Fitzpatrick examined a blow-up of a known X-ray of Mark Dennis and an X-ray of the remains buried in Mark Dennis's grave.
So that we could see the anatomy much clearer.
When he compared 3 specific points from the X-rays, he concluded that the bones had exactly the same configuration.
This area right up in here. I compared the X-rays taken on the 3 vertebrae that were excavated from the site in Vietnam with the X-ray of Mark Dennis. The 3 vertebrae are identical. There's enough unique about everybody, no matter what we look at, that no 2 people are alike. And therefore, the vertebrae are those of Mark Dennis, and this is a 100% identification.
After we received Dr. Fitzpatrick's analysis, we contacted Jerry Dennis for his comments. In spite of the new forensic findings, Jerry still believes that his brother did not die when the Navy said he did. The Department of the Army considers the case of Mark Dennis closed. Next, how our viewers helped capture Kenneth Robert Stanton, one of the FBI's 10 most wanted criminals. Recently, the director of the FBI, William Sessions, made a special appeal on Unsolved Mysteries to announce the latest addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted list. In 1964, Kenneth Robert Stanton was convicted of child molestation and diagnosed as a criminal sexual psychopath. He was later declared fit to re-enter society and was set free. In 1989, Stanton was identified in Jackson, Mississippi by a 12-year-old girl he allegedly attempted to molest. According to the girl, Stanton gained entry into her home by posing as a policeman.
Hi, is your mother home?
No.
Well, I'm Officer Tom Coles. I'm with the local police department.
He has a high IQ and he's very intelligent, and he's able to gain their confidence to get inside the house.
I'll be gone.
Okay.
All right.
Once he's inside and he's determined that the children or child is alone, he blindfolds them frequently. Quite often he uses eye drops and a thermometer, possibly for a distraction. It's at that time then that he continues on and assaults the children.
According to the 12-year-old girl, Stanton fled when she began screaming.
After the Jackson, Mississippi assault, there were identifications of Stanton in Columbus, Mississippi, as well as Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Leesburg, Georgia, Douglasville, Georgia, and Warner Robins, Georgia. After reviewing a number of these cases and looking at Stanton's history from the early 1960s, we were able to conclude that he apparently was a lifelong child molester and probably could be described as a serial child molester.
Update. Kenneth Robert Stanton has been captured. Within minutes of our broadcast, several viewers called our telecenter to report that Stanton was living in a trailer park in Moraine, Ohio with his wife. They had been married just a few weeks earlier. Local police and FBI agents arrived at Stanton's trailer only to learn that he himself had seen our broadcast and fled. Stanton's wife and neighbors were stunned.
I've talked to my son and I've had him in front of the house, staying in the yard just in case he come back.
You know, I don't want someone like that running around the streets at all. You know, anyone that does anything like that should be put away.
5 days later, Stanton was identified in Rock Hill, South Carolina, after he allegedly attempted to molest a 9-year-old girl.
Based on seeing the segment on the program, coupled with a police report, we suspected there was a strong possibility that Stanton was in Rock Hill or somewhere in this area. And we proceeded on that assumption that he was possibly staying at a local motel.
2 days later, FBI agents spotted Stanton's car in the parking lot of this motel.
After identifying the vehicle, We established the surveillance of the motel with FBI agents and York County Sheriff's Department detectives.
Incredibly, a check with the motel office revealed that Stanton had registered under his own name.
He had indicated to the clerk previously that he wanted to stay an additional week, but he also wanted to move to the main building. The clerk, at our direction, called his room, told him the new room was ready and he could move. When Stanton emerged from his room, we arrested him. We asked Stanton his name. He said, "You know who I am," and he indicated that he was not a threat to us, that he was only a threat to himself. He did indicate that the following day was his birthday.
When we return, the police are hunting for a suspect who they believe has murdered at least 5 women. July 31st, 1971, Nassau County, New York, 11 p.m. A 20-year-old Argentine man named Ricardo Caputo made a late-night call to the police.
I want to talk to the police.
How can I help you?
I want to report something very important.
Where are you calling from?
He told police to go to the home of his girlfriend's parents. Her name was Natalie Brown. Caputo had been dating Natalie for over a year and had told authorities that he intended to marry her.
I responded to the scene on Middle Neck Road. It was a small cottage-type Cape Cod house. I went in the front door, and immediately on my left, I saw a kitchen, and in the kitchen was the body of Miss Brown. She had been stabbed repeatedly. The room was covered with blood. It was really a vicious assault on her. It was the worst I ever seen in my history. I've covered a lot of homicides in my life.
During the time that Natalie and Ricardo were seeing each other, I never saw any signs of volatile behavior on his part. Both my father and mother seemed to like him. They got along with him well. They both thought he was a nice boy.
Natalie Brown's friends and family described her fiancé as amiable and attractive, with a winning personality. But in the case of Ricardo Caputo, appearances were more than deceiving. They became a lethal weapon. Police believe that since 1971, Caputo has employed his charms to kill again, and again, and again. After Caputo was taken into custody for Natalie Brown's murder, authorities learned that before arriving in the United States in 1970, he had been treated for mental illness in an Argentine hospital. A psychiatric review ruled that Caputo was incompetent to stand trial, so he was remanded to the Mattawan State Hospital in upstate New York. Mattawan is a maximum security institution, and it was there that Caputo would meet a 26-year-old psychologist named Judith Becker.
Well, hello there.
My doctor, my friend. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Fine.
Now listen, there's something I want to talk to you about. The other doctors and I were discussing a project which would involve taking you and a few other patients outside to grow a garden. I think it would be...
I believe it was a relationship of a psychologist and a patient. She felt that her patients were also her friends. She wanted them to trust her. And I think she felt they had to trust her in order to for her to be able to help them.
I will grow you the biggest tomato.
Okay.
Judith Becker was charmed by Caputo, and over the next 2 years, he worked overtime to gain her trust. Apparently, he succeeded.
I do not like to remember.
And speaking to other inmates of Mattawan State Hospital, several of them stated that Ricardo Caputo had been bragging that he was going to use Judith Becker to gain his freedom from Mattawan State Hospital.
In 1973, with Judith Becker's assistance, Ricardo Caputo managed to get transferred out of Mattawan to a Manhattan psychiatric hospital. It had been 2 years since Natalie Brown had been stabbed to death. This hospital was much less restrictive than Mattawan and allowed patients to leave the facility during the day. This new freedom allowed Judith and Caputo to spend more time together outside the hospital walls. Today, there is still a debate on just how intimate they became.
Not like my country, but
From there,
I
their
like it.
relationship became romantic. From time to time, he would leave the grounds and go up to her apartment in Yonkers.
Judy and Ricardo did not have a romantic relationship. She never described it that way. And I believe she knew enough about her profession and her patients to not have allowed that to happen. I think she felt that he needed whatever help she might be able to give him.
What about your family, though?
Judith even took Caputo home to meet her family.
When we met Ricardo, she introduced him as a fellow who worked with her at Matawan. She continued the relationship as a friend and as a psychologist and as somebody he could turn to. And I don't believe that she knew she was in as much danger as she ultimately was.
October 21st, 1974. Judith had failed to meet her parents as planned for a family boating trip. Concerned, they went to her apartment.
Did you press too?
They located the super of the apartment building and, by the use of a passkey, allowed them to enter the apartment.
Judy?
When they entered the apartment where she lived, there was dinner for two on the coffee table in the living room.
Judy?
And when they walked into the bedroom, they found their daughter lying on her back in bed, wearing only a half slip. She had been brutally beaten about the head and strangled with one of her stockings.
Police believe that Caputo took Judith's car, checkbook, and some of her clothing. Then he disappeared. San Francisco, 6 months later, Ricardo Caputo had met another trusting woman. Barbara Taylor was a local book editor. These pictures were taken by Barbara and Caputo on a romantic getaway to Yosemite. But on March 30th, 1975, Barbara was discovered beaten to death in her apartment. Caputo's fingerprints were found at the scene of the crime. By the time Barbara's body was discovered, Ricardo Caputo was nowhere to be found. 5 days later, El Paso, Texas, the search for Ricardo Caputo took a dramatic turn. A man calling himself Ricardo Diaz was delivered into the hands of U.S. immigration by Mexican authorities.
He was turned over to the custody of U.S. officials, and he was incarcerated at the alien detention facility, which is located here in El Paso, Texas. It was actually a lockup there where he was being detained. No charges had been filed against him. It was just an administrative thing.
At first, Diaz attracted little attention until he was fingerprinted. He knew then that it would not take long for his real identity to be uncovered. But Ricardo Diaz was in reality Ricardo Caputo. April 7th, 1975.
Sure do.
Caputo and 3 other detainees took the guard hostage and picked up makeshift weapons in the kitchen. The men then fled the compound and crossed the border into Mexico in a stolen car. All the men were recaptured, with the exception of Caputo. His companions told police Caputo was headed to Mexico City.
There he moved in with a young 21-year-old college student by the name of Laura Marie Gomez.
2 years later, 23-year-old Laura Marie Gomez was found dead in her Mexico City apartment.
Miss Gomez was found brutally beaten, stomped to death. She had been tortured prior to her death.
Laura Gomez was 2.5 months pregnant. Police believe the killer and the father were the same man, Ricardo Caputo.
Handsome, charming, intelligent, has a violent temper which usually results in homicidal outbursts. Since he's done this all over the United States and in Mexico, we have to consider him a serial killer.
Incredibly, police believe Ricardo Caputo was killed again. On August 2nd, 1983, 60-year-old Jackie Bernard, a prominent author and social activist, was found murdered, her throat crushed in her West Side Manhattan apartment. On January 22nd, 1985, a private investigator hired by Jackie's family received an anonymous phone call identifying Jackie's killer as Ricardo Caputo.
The caller also said that Caputo boasted about killing several other women and also some men.
At Jackie Bernard's residence, her superintendent told Gordon McEwen that he was positive that he had seen Caputo on the premises attempting to gain entry into Jackie's apartment.
I know that guy.
The superintendent was absolutely positive of his identification of Caputo. He even added that the hairline of Caputo's hair had receded somewhat. He also informed me that Caputo spoke with a South American accent. He was very positive.
Caputo is a chameleon. He can change his identity, he can change his looks, and he can kill and have no remorse for having killed. He's a good con artist. He's a smooth talker. He could function in probably just about any situation he set his mind to go into.
I'd hate to think that Ricardo will have the opportunity to do it to another lady, or anybody else for that matter. And I think he'd be better off dead.
When we return, an eerie tale of bizarre lights in the Canadian sky and the woman who has filmed them. UFO sightings can usually be explained away as airplane lights, weather balloons, military maneuvers, even mass hysteria. Sightings sometimes gain credibility when they are supported by photographs which cannot be written off as obvious hoaxes. All of these photographs, and thousands like them, have been taken over the last 16 years in Canada. They baffle even the harshest skeptic and raise two elegantly simple questions: how and why? Vancouver, British Columbia, on the Pacific coast of Canada. For 35 years, this city has reported an inordinate number of UFO sightings. The most frequent and well-documented of the sightings have all been attributed to one woman, Dorothy Izat, a homemaker and mother of four. Dorothy's first sighting occurred 16 years ago on November 9th, 1974. She was 52 years old.
I was in the kitchen fixing myself a cup of tea, and I had a sensation that something was watching me. Very, very strong feeling. So I went over to the window, and here was this enormous object sitting up in the sky. It looked like an enormous diamond. It was just flashing, going around and around and around. It was so beautiful to look at that I felt I was really lifted up. It was absolutely a wonderful feeling. I wasn't afraid at all, you know. I felt very privileged to be able to see something like that.
At that time, Dorothy and her family lived in Richmond, a modest suburb of Vancouver. They considered themselves average, working-class people. Dorothy's husband and children took her UFO sightings lightly, almost as a joke. Their skepticism motivated Dorothy to prove that what she had seen was not simply a star or an airplane.
I said, I must find some way of communicating with this thing up there. So I picked up a flashlight and said, all right, whatever I do with this flashlight, would you please imitate me? So I flashed the light 3 times to the left, and this object went 3 times to the left. Then I flashed it 3 times to the right, and the object went 3 times to the right. Then I went 3 times upwards, it went 3 times upwards, 3 times downwards, it went 3 times downwards. It was doing everything, and then zigzagging, and it went zigzag. So I said, I'm not imagining this. I said, this is really happening, so it's intelligent.
Dorothy was amazed that the lights seemed to be trying to communicate with her, so she attempted to capture them on film. The results would be startling.
What I saw in the sky was just round objects of light, round balls of light. But what was on the film, you'll see the balls of light, but after a couple of frames, there'll be this enormous blast of light.
This is actual footage from Dorothy's Super 8mm home movies. On her home viewer, Dorothy inched the film back and forth until she isolated a single bright frame. What had at first appeared to be a simple flash of light was actually a maze of colored streaks. Oddly, the light did not spill over onto adjacent frames.
I noticed that while I'm filming these objects, they'll suddenly stop, and then I'll notice one object like shooting out a little beam at the other object, and that object will be shooting out a little beam back at it, and sort of, I guess it must be messages or something that they're passing back and forth on these beams of light. And then when I get it developed, I'll find all these strange one-frame shots on it.
Dorothy had the single frames of film blown up into photographs. Bright kinetic beams careened in all directions. She also blew up frames of the mysterious balls of light. These photographs began to show more and more curious detail.
Sometimes they'll beam the light down at me. They'll just beam this enormous light down at me, you know, and I'll be all lit up with this light. I used to ask them to come closer and closer because I wanted better shots. And they did, you know, like come closer and closer.
I don't think she's lying about what she's doing. I feel that she's quite sincere. On the other hand, I'm not able to assess her photographs professionally because that's not part of my expertise. But her personality makeup would make me believe that she's not making things up.
Like most UFO sightings, Dorothy's experiences and her photographs seem to defy conventional logic. She says she used 3 different cameras. Each one yielded similar results. We asked a photography expert to evaluate Dorothy's film.
I have seen several similar examples of photography like this. Light sources in the sky with dark backgrounds are quite easy to manipulate. But these are more extraordinary in the sense that they were done with an 8mm camera, a motion picture camera rather than a still camera, and they have so many different types of effects. There's images that I can't explain at all, explain how the lights got into the individual frames. I can suggest ways that they could have been put in intentionally, but no ways that they could accidentally have been placed into the film. I believe that these images were produced by natural occurring phenomenon in the night sky and not by extraterrestrial beings or unexplained objects.
Despite endless skepticism from the scientific community, Dorothy Izat has become an internationally known figure in the world of UFOs. As Dorothy's fame spread, people often came to visit her in Vancouver. One of them was Jerry Mackay, a planning and marketing consultant. He had read an article about Dorothy and felt strongly that he had to meet her.
I was interested enough and moved enough by that article that I really did just want to find out more for my own interest's sake. I think it's healthy to be skeptical because I was myself. I didn't have any previous experience with the subject matter at all. I didn't even realize up until that point that I had as much of an interest with it as it's turned out that I do. And these are like daytime type shots. Or they look like it is, or is it just the type of lighting or whatever?
Well, I was told to try and get some pictures in the daytime as well, and that's why I got these.
I was listening very intently to what she was saying, at which time I noticed that I was hearing some kind of audible sensing thing that was happening only in my right ear.
So that they know it's solid and it's not just...
Excuse me, Dorothy, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm getting a strange sensation in my ear here. So I'm sort of losing what you're saying.
You can hear that?
And I looked at her and I said, yes, I can. What is it? And this brilliant beam of smile went from ear to ear on her face. And I remember the look that she gave me. And she said, they're here.
Jerry Mackay was the first person to say he actually heard the same thing that Dorothy heard.
I don't think any more than 15 or 20 seconds went by, and she said, do you see it?
Do you see it, Jerry?
No, I don't see anything.
Where are you looking?
I'm looking straight ahead across the Cypress Bowl. She goes, no, look over here to the left where I am.
You see that? Right up there.
To my complete shock and amazement, what appeared to be sitting right out in front of the window just to our left was a hard metallic object. I remember the feeling was so intense, it was like I was standing in a vacuum and all my hair was standing on end. And as soon as it disappeared, Dorothy let out a giggle that was like, there you go. What do you think of that?
Jerry commissioned an artist to draw what he and Dorothy had seen. He says he was completely overwhelmed. It did not occur to him to try to photograph the object. Dorothy has accumulated more than 25 hours of film and has had blow-ups made of 3,000 frames. Her enthusiasm remains unabated, and she continues to film, hoping that she can one day decipher the meaning, if any, of the lights.
I feel there is some sort of message in there for us. They're trying to tell us something from these pictures. It seems like they're coming closer and closer all the time compared to the first pictures I used to take. And each picture now that I'm getting is far more vivid. It varies all the time. My mission is to just keep filming, I guess, and receiving these pictures for as long as I am able to, and hope that one day someone or somewhere will be able to understand what it's all about.
When Unsolved Mysteries visited Dorothy Izat's home in Vancouver, she told us the lights were there, and she filmed them with her Super 8mm camera. We could not see the lights, but our cameraman attempted to film them anyway. He also asked Dorothy to operate his camera. The film from Dorothy's 8mm camera showed the usual brilliant light patterns. When we developed our film, we did find one tiny, unidentifiable light in the sky, but it exhibited none of the characteristics seen in Dorothy's photographs. Next week on Unsolved Mysteries. In 1986, the body of 28-year-old Debbie Wolfe was found in an oil drum, submerged in the icy waters of a pond near Fayetteville, North Carolina. The police ruled it an accidental drowning. The family says it was murder. 80 years ago, Conradina Olson boarded a train in Wisconsin and was never seen again. Her granddaughter will not rest until she finds an answer. Did Conradina simply run away, or was she murdered? We'll also bring you a dramatic update on our recent story of a female prison guard who fell in love with a convict and allegedly helped him escape. Join me next week for another edition of Unsolved Mysteries.
Thank you.